MakerSnack.
We're going to learn how to play our own sound files in Circuit Playground Express using CircuitPython. And you can use this for all sorts of things, like this interactive map with capacitive touch paint that'll play a sound when touched, or creating your own paper-based 808 drum machine. This one uses copper tape instead of capacitive touch paint. Now find the files to get started at this URL. That's github.com/Gallagher with a U /CircuitPython_sound_code. There you'll be able to download the sample WAV files as well as 2 code examples in Python. Simply go up here to the green clone or download button, click on download zip, save that to your desktop, and then double click on the zip file to decompress it. Now this will decompress as a folder named CircuitPython_sound_code-master. Now if you get inside of this folder, you'll see that there are a bunch of WAV files that you can copy over to your Circuit Playground Express. Just make sure that your CPX is plugged in and CircuitPython is installed. Now you also want to make sure that these files are really small, just short sound clips. The 7 clips I've got here use up almost all of the storage capacity available on the Circuit Playground Express. Now if you don't know how to set up these files, you can check the previous tutorial. Now the code that we're about to leverage is going to play a separate WAV file when each of the 7 capacitive touch pads around the Circuit Playground Express is touched. Now Adafruit has a great set of tutorials online, CircuitPython Made Easy and the Circuit Playground Express. Now we're in the play file subcategory here. Now this documentation is a really great place to go to learn more or in case you run into any problems. And in fact, the very first example we're going to be using is based on this little chunk of code that we see right here. Now if we paste this code into our Mu editor, we'll see that this is set up to respond to a button A press and a button B press. But if we take a look at the documentation for CircuitPython and the Circuit Playground Express, we can see that we can change the code from responding to a button A press and instead do cpx.touch underscore and then the name corresponding to the appropriate sensor pin. So that's A1 through A7. Now let's head back over to Mu, and we don't want to respond to the button, we want to respond to cpx_touch_A1. And we can get rid of button B, but what we'll do then is we'll copy A1 and we'll paste it in 7 times, and then we'll change this little chunk of code that we typed in so that we're responding to, we'll do after A1, we'll change it to A2, A3, A4, A5, A6, and A7. So now we have an if condition for each of our capacitive touch sensors, A1 through A7. And now we're also going to need to change the name of the WAV files that we have in here, but we've got those names already set up in the folder that we just downloaded. So if we grab each of these, if we're going to do our sound board, in fact I probably shouldn't have said sound map, I should say sound board in here. I'm just going to copy each one of these. So the first one is going to be cymbal, the next one is going to be snare, the next one is going to be bass, and likewise all the way down the list here. And cowbell, never have enough cowbell, that's the last one. And now with your CPX plugged in, just double click on where it says Untitled, and you might have to press the reset button on your Circuit Playground Express to make sure that CircuitPython shows up here. Click on this and then type in code.py and save that again to your CircuitPython, which is your drive that represents the CPX. And you might hear in the background the cymbals are repeatedly going off on their own, and I'm actually not touching anything. So I'm just going to unplug my CPX for a second. So my touchpads are too sensitive, but we can use a CircuitPython command called the threshold command to change the sensitivity. And that allows us to adjust the capacitive touch threshold in terms of how sensitive it is. So we can just use this one command right here. In fact, I can grab this little chunk of code right here, and we can put this in just before our while true loop. So if you ever find that your CPX is just continuing to sound off like mine did, or if it's not sensitive enough, you can just adjust this. So for example, it sounded like it was too sensitive, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase this to maybe 500, and we'll see how this works. And again, I'll plug in my CPX again, and save this as code.py, and replace what I've got there, and we should see that this changes. I might have to go ahead and just do a quick save here. But now I don't have the sound in the back, and I find that my threshold is working great. You'll also notice that you are less sensitive when you're plugged into the battery pack than you are when you're plugged into the USB. So let's try our drum machine. The code that we've written isn't bad, but we can actually do a better job here, and we're going to leverage some code that's written by a guy named John Park that writes a bunch of tutorials for Adafruit. And his code here, instead of using the CPX library, he uses the board, the audio I/O, and the touch I/O library. So he's got to write a little bit more code here. But by using this approach, John's code is actually a lot more responsive in terms of presses on the capacitive touchpads. And we haven't talked about this yet, but here's a little function that he's created called play file name. So it's a rather elegant code that he's written. So what I've done is I've modified some of John's code here. Let's head over to the Moo editor and we'll load up a file that we downloaded earlier that actually contains this modified code. We had saved into the desktop in this folder here. You'll notice that there's something that's called Better Drum Machine. So we'll build off of John Park's great tutorial here and add a few of our own modifications, and we'll get a more responsive drum kit. Now notice the threshold that we've got set up here too. I go through all of the different pads and set the threshold to 1000. So if you find your little pads are responding, either they're too sensitive or they're not sensitive enough, you can change this number here. And I usually go up or down by increments of 100 or maybe 200 at a time until I get the sensitivity just right. And so now that I've got this saved here, I'm going to close out the old code.py that I've got. I'm going to double click on this and I'm going to go back over to CircuitPy here and I'm going to save this as code.py, and that should save over the code that I've got on Circuit Playground, and my drum machine should be set up. Now also know, once you've set this up, you can use the same kind of code that we've set up just now, whether it was the previous code that was sort of simple or the more advanced code here, to do all sorts of things like the talking plant that I had created that my students can see if they visit my office. But it's time to go ahead and try out our new drum machine. So that's our tutorial on playing sound files on the Circuit Playground Express using CircuitPython. I hope you've enjoyed this. MakerSnack.